Some stories are folklore, some stories are warnings, and some are neither myth nor fable, but something far more unsettling. Tonight's story is the latter. In the rolling hills of 19th century Tennessee, long before electricity and paved roads, there lived a family who became the centre of the most infamous haunting in American history. It was a haunting that changed a town, drew in a future president, and left behind a legend that still breathes 200 years later. It came to be known simply as the Bell Witch. This wasn't the kind of ghost that would rattle your windows and move your curtains for attention. It wasn't the kind of ghost that you would just see flickering in the corner of your eye. This ghost was far more cruel and deceptive. A presence that studied you, learned your weaknesses, and then pounced on them. What began as faint knocks grew into something darker and far more sinister. It led to psychological and physical torture, and sometimes even death. So tonight we go back to where it all began. We go to a quiet Tennessee farm which was ground zero for a mystery that refuses to rest. Welcome back to Nightmare Situations. The story we've got for you tonight will chill you to your core. If you enjoy it, then don't forget to subscribe. Now, let's get into it. The year is 1804. John Bell packed up everything that he knew in North Carolina and moved himself, his wife Lucy, and their children to the wilderness of Tennessee. The land along the river was fertile, rich, dark soil with thick woods. To a man like John Bell, a devout Baptist, an ambitious farmer, it seemed like a perfect place to start a new life. The Bells built a homestead there, 2 stories of timber and stone, surrounded by fields of corn, wheat, and cotton. By the standards at the time, the house that they had built was an impressive estate, with a working mill, livestock, enough to make them one of the most prosperous families in the area. John was very well respected in his area. He was known to be honest, generous, and deeply religious. His wife Lucy was also admired. She would nurse sick neighbours back to health and feed any travellers that were passing through the area. For more than a decade, everything was fine. They went to church on Sundays, worked Monday to Saturday, and just got on with their life, making a healthy living. It was quiet, peaceful, and predictable. But on the edge of that peace, something dark, something sinister was waiting. No one could have ever known that beneath that calm, soft rhythm of farm life, something dark was lurking that would soon shake their world to its very core. It began in the autumn of 1817. John Bell was walking through one of his cornfields when he noticed something peculiar between one of the rows. The evening light was fading, and for a moment he thought it was a large animal, just crouched down. As he got closer, its outline made no sense. The body was shaped like a dog, but it had a head more long and thin, something that resembled more of a rabbit. The creature just stood there and stared straight back at him. John raised his rifle and fired. The gunshot echoed between the trees across the cornfields. When the smoke had cleared, the creature was gone. No blood, no tracks, nothing at all. He went home unsettled, but nothing more than that, just thinking it was a trick of the light. But that night, after the lamps had blown out and his family had gone to bed, something was tapping against the outside of the house. John got up, he checked the windows, he checked every door of the property. No one was there. Absolute silence. The next night, the knocking returned again, but this time was different. This time was far more unsettling. This time, the knocking circled the house, knocking against every exterior wall of the property, like it was hunting them, like it was deliberately trying to torture them so they didn't know where to look for whatever was causing the knock. The children woke. Lucy tried to go there and console them to try and make them feel a little bit easier about what was happening. She said it was the wind. By the third night, the knocks had become deep thuds. They would hear nails or claws scratching against the walls. From this moment on, the Bell household no longer knew peace. After that autumn evening, nothing was ever the same. Each night brought new disturbances. The family would lie awake, listening, and the noises seemed like they were coming from every direction, all at once. At first it was scratching, faint but persistent, like there were rats running within the walls. But then when John checked, nothing was there. He sealed every crack and laid mouse traps all over the property. He even tore away panels from the wall to check within. Nothing was ever found. Then came the heavy thumps from the attic. It sounded like someone was moving furniture up there, right above their heads. But the family knew nothing was up there. The attic was completely empty. Sometimes the family would even hear the moving of chains from room to room. It would start softly, but then rattle so violently that the house would seem to shake. When they ran outside and lit lanterns, the sounds would stop. The fields would be still. The trees stood motionless in the night air. No footprints, no movement, no explanation. Soon, the sound started to move around the house itself. They would hear footsteps on the wooden floorboards long after the family had gone to bed. They would hear the creaks of doors opening on their own. And most unsettlingly, they would hear wet gulps like someone was choking in the darkness. Lucy prayed every night to try and get this devil out of her house, but this only made the entity grow stronger. It would pull the covers off of the children as they slept. Something unseen would hit them and pull at their hair. The youngest of the Bell children awoke crying, clutching their arms and legs, saying that something had gripped them and scratched them while they were lying in bed. The family began sleeping in groups, lighting candles to try and block out whatever was lurking in the dark. But the light of these candles only revealed more terror. Soon, faint voices would echo around the house. At first, just murmurs, not enough to really work out what was being said. But as time went on, the voices grew stronger. Sometimes they would sing hymns, sometimes they would say prayers, and then in a split second, they would completely switch up, and they would start to taunt, antagonise, and insult both John and Lucy. Betsy, John and Lucy's 12-year-old daughter, became the main focus for the entity. She would constantly say that she was slapped by something unseen, and she would always wake up with scratch marks on her arms and legs. She was once pulled from her bed onto the wooden floor. When the family rushed together, no one was in the room. John's faith began to unravel. He was still praying every day, but there was no relief. Whatever was haunting their home wasn't deterred by religion. It was not afraid of the world of God. It was intelligent, it was aware, and it seemed to be growing stronger. Next, the voice, the unseen tormentor, it gave itself a name. It called itself Kate. She mocked John, seemed to relish in his suffering. Although no one could prove it, many came to believe that it was the ghost of Kate Batts that returned to make good on her curse. The name spread quickly. Soon everyone in the religion was calling the entity by a new title, the Bell Witch. What made the Bell Witch different from every other haunting in history was its precision and its personality. It wasn't a faint echo or a shapeless shadow. It was articulate, it was reasoned, it was debated. It spoke of religion, life, and death, with intelligence that terrified even the most learned of men. As the months passed, her focus on John and Betsy grew more intense. The family were exhausted, their nights were sleepless, and their days were spent quiet with dread. They began to realise that whatever haunted them was something dark, ancient, and it wasn't finished with them yet. As 1818 turned into 1819, the haunting evolved into something that no one in the Red River community had ever experienced. What began as a faint whisper became a full voice, confident, taunting, and impossible to ignore. The Bell Witch spoke with a clear voice. The Bell Witch spoke with a distinct personality. She seemed capable of conversation, able to argue and reason, insult or flatter, and laugh or cry. Her voice carried through rooms like the breath of a living person, sometimes soft and almost kind, other times cruel and furious. The Bell family learnt that she could hear every word that they spoke, even their thoughts, or so it seemed. When they whispered privately, she would interrupt and finish their conversations, or mock them. When they tried to pray, she would recite the prayer out loud with them, sometimes finishing it before they could even finish it themselves. The witch demonstrated knowledge of events that took place far beyond the household itself. She would recite sermons that were delivered in churches miles away, repeating them word for word as they were being delivered. Some people say she could travel anywhere instantly. Others believe it was more like many spirits communicating with one voice. But one thing was clear: the Bell Witch thrived on attention and fear, and the more people spoke her name, the stronger she became. John Bell, once a respected man, was now completely broken. He aged quickly under the strain. His face was pale and gaunt. He rarely left the house. He was too scared that if he had gone out into the fields, that the voice would follow him. The witch would never stop mocking him, calling him a fraud, a hypocrite, and a man cursed by his own sins. No one deserves the torment that John went through. The townspeople were divided. Some believed the Bells were truly cursed, punished for unknown sins that they may have committed before they arrived. Others thought that the family was somehow responsible for the spirit coming themselves, like they had invited the dark entity into their home. But for those who witnessed or heard the voice of the witch, they were shaken to their very core. The entity's intelligence made it almost impossible to dismiss as superstition. It knew secrets, habits, and even private prayers. It shifted from friendly to vicious without any warning, and through it all, it maintained its hold over the Bells, particularly John and their daughter Betsy. The witch's fixation on Betsy defied explanation. Some say it was out of jealousy, like the spirit despised her for her beauty and her innocence. Others believe that Betsy was the witch's chosen victim, the one who she seemed to exert her power over. Whatever the reason was, the cruelty was relentless. John's health began to decline rapidly, and the worse he became, the louder the witch grew. By the winter of 1820, John Bell was bedridden. He drifted in and out of consciousness. His breath was shallow and uneven. The family tried to make John as comfortable as possible, but even their quiet care was interrupted by a low voice, taunting and full of malice. Then, on the morning of December 19th, Lucy went to prepare John's medicine. On his bedside, she found a small vial containing a dark, oily liquid. She had never seen this before. Assuming it was one of the children that had misplaced it, she called the family together to ask. No one recognised it. When she lifted the bottle, the witch's voice filled the room, triumphant, gleeful, claiming credit for the contents in the vial. To test the content, they placed one drop onto the family cat's tongue. Moments later, the animal convulsed and died. The family were froze in horror. John Bell never woke again. He passed quietly that very same day. Those who were there claimed that when he took his final breath, a voice echoed through the room, laughing and declaring that the torment was complete. At the funeral, the atmosphere was heavy and grief-stricken. Neighbours from across the valley gathered to pay their respects. but as the preacher began the sermon, the witch's laughter cut through the air, rising above the prayers and the hymns. The sound was described as inhuman, shrill, wild, and joyous. Even after death, John Bell found no peace. The witch's laughter carried all the way to the graveyard. It was said that the church's bells rang on their own that afternoon, a final mockery of the man that she hated the most. After his burial, the haunting seemed to subside. The scratching stopped, the knocking ceased, and the air in the Bell house felt lighter, as though the spirit was satisfied and had finally left them alone. But the Bell Witch's story didn't end there. Her obsession had just merely shifted, and now her attention had turned towards one member of the family who had suffered nearly as much as John himself, Betsy Bell. The family began to think that the haunting was over, that they could live in peace. But by 1821, Betsy was engaged to a young man, Joshua Gardner, a local teacher and a family friend. He was kind, gentle, and devoted to her. For the first time in years, she had an element of hope, a chance for a life untouched by the witch's cruelty. But the spirit seemed unwilling to let that happen. Whenever Betsy and Joshua spent time together, strange events would follow. Their conversations would be interrupted by loud bangs on the wall and the sound of things crashing in the next room. At night, Betsy would awake to find the bed violently shaking, her hair twisted into knots. Sometimes she would feel constriction on her throat, as if invisible hands were squeezing as she was sleeping. The voice returned, now colder and deeper than ever, whispering threats and filling the air with dread. Her mother cried out at night, her body trembling in fear, unable to escape what she couldn't see. The haunting took a toll on Joshua as well. He tried to comfort Betsy, but he couldn't handle the scariness of what was happening. It was calling his name, footsteps following into his home, and sudden gusts of cold air when there was no wind present. The witch seemed desperate to keep them apart. Her cruelty escalated until Betsy could no longer bear it. In the spring of 1821, she broke off the engagement. She told her family she had no choice. She believed the spirit would kill them both if they continued to date. The heartbreak was devastating to her, but the torment eased almost immediately after the breakup. It was as though the witch had achieved exactly what she wanted to. Shortly after Betsy ended the engagement, the voice grew softer. The presence that had once dominated their lives began to fade away. Then, one night, it announced its departure. It told the family it would leave for 7 years, and true to that promise, the house fell silent. For the first time in 4 years, the Bells experienced peace. The crops grew again, the children laughed, and Lucy smiled. The nightmare that had haunted them had seemed to finally have come to an end. But the Bell Witch was not finished with them. She had only paused. 7 years later, in 1828, she returned. Silence can be deceptive. It often holds its breath just before it stirs again. On one crisp autumn night in 1828, the silence broke again. It began in the same way as it did before: knockings, scratchings, soft noises that could be mistaken for house movements. Then came the whispering, faint at first, distant, like wind through the trees, but then it grew clearer, sharper, and more terrifying. One thing became clear: the witch had returned. This time, however, the witch's demeanour was different. There was no malice, no cruelty, and no violent rage. Instead, she spoke calmly, almost warmly, as though visiting old friends. She addressed herself to John Bell Jr., one of her sons who had survived the terror in his childhood. The conversations between lasted for nights on end. The witch seemed to possess knowledge beyond human understanding, speaking of distant lands, wars that were yet to come, and the inventions that would one day change the world. The visits continued for weeks. Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she announced that she'd be leaving. For good this time. Or almost. She said she was going to return in 107 years. That date would have fell in 1935. If she had kept her word, no one recorded it. But even without proof, locals claim that strange happenings did happen that year. Unexplainable noises near the Bell's property, voices in the wind, and sudden drops in temperature at night. It was enough to keep a legend alive. The Bell Witch never appeared in the form that terrorised the family. Her presence, many said, never left Red River. The land itself is scarred by a haunting too deep to truly ever fade. To this day, the Bell Witch remains a mystery, something that can't be proven. Let me know what you think down in the comments. You've been watching Nightmare Situations. If you did enjoy this video, then don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. And remember, sometimes reality is more terrifying than any nightmare. Thank you for watching.